Hey folks, welcome back to the channel, your home for all content Lord of the Rings home. I hope you're having a lovely weekend. Today we're going to do a big video explaining what the star stat changes mean. And kind of the structure of this video is going to be explaining the changes, explaining why people are upset, why there's some controversy about this, how big are these changes, doing a little math, but kind of showcasing maybe with some graphs like, okay, how big is a change from 5-star now to 5-star later, 7-star now to 7-star later? So, and then we're going to evaluate, okay, are these people right to be mad and upset? And is this controversy sort of warranted? Then we're going to talk about how that affects you. So I'll try and put timestamps down in the description below so you can sort of skip to whatever part you want to. But with that, let's get started on talking about what exactly the change is. So, this is not currently in the game, and I'm going to re-emphasize that throughout the video. This is not in the game yet, but at the next big patch, which we expect will be when they drop raids, and that's probably sometime late July, early August is my guess. They're going to implement this change. And basically, it's taking the values, the stat bonuses you get from having stars on your character and upping them for when you are 4 stars and above. So you can see that in this little table here. At 4 stars and above, we're going from 1.3 on this multiplier to 1.6. And then it gets even bigger when you get to 7-star. It goes from 2 times to 4 times. So we're going to get into exactly what that means, because it's not just, a straight doubling of your stats at 7-star characters, but it's still a pretty big change. And then with that change, they're adjusting different PvE scenarios. So Chapter 5 and Chapter 6 of Light Campaign for normal, Chapter 5 hard is getting adjusted. And for Shadow Campaign, it's Chapter 5 and 6. And then importantly, 4, 7, and Chapter 5 on the hard nodes for Shadow. So that last 4-7 node, I believe that's the one where you get the Witch King, which is already pretty difficult. I guess that's also going to have its difficulty changed. Notice that they don't say increased or decreased in difficulty, but I think it's a safer assumption to think that they're going to increase the difficulty to be in line with these particular changes. And even more than the light and shadow campaigns, I think this is actually more important. They're changing the difficulty on all of the daily challenge tier 6, and then the 5s. They're changing the difficulty for tier 5 for Forged in the Deep, Dark Relics, and Lost Artifacts. So that's the Light Crystal one, the Shadow Crystal one, and then also the Challenge Token one, surprisingly. So those are the changes. Again, they're not currently in the game, but they will be in the next patch, which we expect in, a month, less than a month, basically. Let's talk about why people are upset. And I've kind of grouped what I personally saw people's grievances into sort of 3 different buckets, I should say. First one being, we should have been told this information before Elrond so that we could make a more informed purchase decision, or even earlier, as this is a large change to the fundamental mechanics of the game. 2, getting marquees to 5-star are pretty much worthless now. You should only either get them at 7-star or not at all. I saw a lot of people saying all 5 stars are basically useless now. And that you should only have things 7-star or not at all. We're going to talk about that. And then the last one I didn't see as much of, but I saw a few rumblings of, is this is basically a last-ditch money grab to make whales spend more because the game is essentially on the brink of death and dying. I only saw a few people say that. I don't think that was a general sort of consensus, but those were kind of the range of complaints I saw, and I could kind of fit them into this particular bucket. So now I want to talk about exactly how big these changes are, and then we can determine, okay, is there a reason to be a little upset here? All right, to do that, we're first going to talk about a little math, which I know everybody loves the math lessons I give out on this channel, but it's really easy, I swear, and basically for any stat you want to calculate, you have your total stats, right? It's just equal to the stats you get from your gear pieces, from your, this should say gear, or armor, from your gear, and that is added to the stats you get from your levels times a star multiplier. So you should take away 2 things from this particular formula. 1, levels make your stars better because they increase your base stats. So The stars are directly affecting the base stats that you get from your levels. 2, armor stats or gear stats aren't affected by stars. Those are the two big takeaways. Gear is not going to be affected by the change to star multipliers, but your levels are definitely going to play more of a role now than they did even previously. Levels were already a pretty good investment for your money, and now they're definitely going to be a really good investment for your money, for your gold. So how exactly does this change affect us? So because we have a portion of our stats coming from gear and it's not affected by stars, that's what I was talking about earlier, where you see that ×2 to ×4, it's not just a straight doubling of your stats, because you also have to take into account that some of your stats come from gear, which is independent of this sort of star multiplier. But I've graphed it here so that you can kind of visually see what we're talking about. No changes to 3 stars. The changes start at 4 stars. Blue is pre-patch and red is post-patch. And you can see even at these lower star levels here, there's actually a pretty sizable difference here. So at 4 star, it looks like maybe like 18, close to 20% of your stats come from your stars multiplying off of your levels. And instead, after the patch, it's over 20%. I think there's maybe a more clear example here at 5 star. So at 5 star, the percentage of your stats that come from your star level is about 20%. Whereas after the patch, it's 40%. And at 7 star, it's even more drastic, right? Where it's coming in around about 38% maybe at 7 star. So it's about a third split between your gear, your levels, and your stars at 7 star, and that goes up to north of 60% at 7 star. So a few things I want to note here. Currently, to get to level 60, you need about 550k in gold. To get to gear level 8, it's also around 500 to 560k in gold. So those are pretty similar. And honestly, they have pretty similar stat contributions as well. But stars, to go from 1 to 7 stars is basically 1 million gold. And you might be thinking, well, most characters, you don't start at 1 star. But even going from 3 to 7 stars, it's still basically 1 million gold. You get a little bit less when you're going from 5 to 7, so legendaries obviously get an advantage there. It's like still 750k in gold. So basically, you were paying double to get the same stats that you needed from gear and levels. And so this is where all that advice was coming from. Like, well, you don't have to really go past 3 stars at the moment because the gold isn't worth it for the stat gain, especially compared to gear and levels. This change is going to bring them more in line with what the cost is you're spending there. Does that make sense? Of course, instead of doubling the stats, the other option they had was having the cost of all the gold, but I guess I can't really see CG doing that. So 7 star is going to be incredibly important because, these are going to be really, really big changes. Characters that are 7 stars are going to absolutely wipe the floor with pretty much anybody that's at 5 star or below. I think that's a pretty fair thing to say at the moment. I take that back. They're not going to absolutely wipe the floor. I think the matchup probably depends a little bit, but like if you have the same characters at 7 star, they're obviously going to wipe the floor with the same characters at 5 star, which 7 stars will currently beat 5 stars if they're the same sort of team and setup, but it's more close than it's going to be after the patch. One question you may be asking yourself is, well, I heard maybe that we're going to be getting Gear 9 with the raids. They have all the Gear 9 stuff in game. You could see Gear 9 stats on LOTR.gg. Like, that's got to be coming soon, right? So is this going to sort of even things out for this big change in the stars? And the answer is basically no. I know it's maybe probably really hard to see here, but the answer is no. You go from about 61% or 62% of your stats being from stars at Gear 8, and that just goes down to about 60% at Gear 9. So Not a big change there. The star level is going to be the primary driver of stats. And it's important to remember that those stats are multiplying off the base stats of levels. So you can't just focus on stars. You also do need to get levels up there so that your stars are essentially more effective. So let's circle back to the question. Are these people right to be mad? And to sort of address that first point that we should have known about this before Elrond, because then you could have maybe made a different purchasing decision. I think if you think about the scenario where they did tell us before Elrond, oh, by the way, your 5-star legendary, just unlocking it is going to be less useful, and you really just need to get a 7-star. I really think that that would have come off worse than the way they've done it now. In reality, this is something that probably should have been, worked out in beta. And I think it's kind of interesting that they're just now sort of picking up on the fact that stars aren't where they want them to be. Why didn't that happen in beta? Why is this change happening now? Is it just because beta players were playing things differently? Is it because, they just finally finished being able to simulate like all the tuning that they need to do to make these changes happen? What's the deal here? Why is it happening now? And why didn't it happen previously? Very curious about that. Doubt we're ever going to get an answer to that. But I do think if I had an option between knowing now and knowing before Elrond, I think putting it out there now is a much better optics sort of thing to do than putting it out right before Elrond, right? I do think that this brings star levels more in line with CG's other game, Swigo. It's very different than MSF in that regard. The shard system here is the same as in MSF, and they compensate you by giving you more shards, but the power level of different star levels is definitely going to be more in line with how Swigo does it now than how MSF does it. Basically, in Swigo, you do need to get everybody to 7 stars for them to be viable, especially at any sort of endgame type situation. That game's been around for a while. In our particular case, this idea that 5-star teams or 5-star characters just suddenly become useless, I don't think is actually the case. I think people are specifically thinking about Arena, and in that case, I can agree with you that you should start to be replacing people on your Arena team with people that you can farm up to 7 stars a lot faster. But I think people are now just sort of assuming that if you have a 5-star Elrond team, right, a 5-star Rivendell team, you paid for the 5-star Rivendell team, which I did, that's going to, after the patch, automatically be blown out of the water by all these people that have these 7-star teams made from free-to-play characters. And I think there are kind of 2 scenarios you can look at with this. One is somebody who paid for Elrond to get him to 5 stars, do an unlock, and they don't care about Arena anymore, or they stop playing the game, or whatever. So they're not upgrading the Rivendell team at all. I think in that particular scenario that, yeah, if you are farming, if you're like free-to-play or light spender and you farm up characters to 7-star that are free-to-play friendly, then I think that should be competitive with a 5-star team that there is no longer being upgraded, a 5-star legendary team that's no longer being upgraded. And I think this is where a lot of people differ. For me, I think that's a reasonable line to draw between being, the pay-to-play characters and the free-to-play characters. I think that is a reasonable place to balance things. That should be a competitive matchup in my mind. I think that's reasonable. I think a lot of people disagree with that, and they would prefer, a 5-star legendary is pretty much always just going to trounce free-to-play characters. But I think if you're a free-to-play character and you've got a 7-star Arena team, which meant you really, really focused on just your Arena team and gearing them up and starring them up and doing all that resources, there's a word for it that I really like, scrupulous. If you were scrupulous enough to do that as a free-to-play player, then I feel like that should be rewarded. And so that's scenario 1. I'm okay with that sort of situation. I think people, where that line goes is where people are differing, though. Situation 2, though, is what I think is going to be more common. And that is, yeah, I paid for a 5-star Elrond team, and somebody's going to start to bring up their arena team with free-to-play characters to be 7-star, but I'm not static in upgrading my arena team. I'm also going to be upgrading my arena team to have 7-star characters. Elra here is going to 7 stars. I might replace somebody with Ironhide, which I can now take to 7 stars. I'm now curious about Ugluk being at 7 stars, right? So it's not just, as soon as Arwen and Eladin are farmable, especially Eladin, you better believe I'm going to try and be farming them to 7 stars, right? So I'm not going to keep my arena team static. But I think people are really, really focused on arena right now, and I'm not sure that's the best way to think about things, right? We don't know all the details about the raid, but I'm going to, I think, correctly assume that you're going to be able to use and you're going to need different teams for the raid. So you're not going to just need an arena team. You're going to need other teams for your raid. So you got to have multiple teams built up. And that's why I don't think 5-star characters are suddenly going to be trash. I think they're going to be really good raid options. And anytime you have the ability to get these extra resources because you kind of have these parts of your roster, that's going to put you ahead. So if you're a free-to-play player and you've spent all of your time and energy on getting a 7-star arena team, you're going to be falling behind in raids. And raids, yeah, they have guild rewards, but they also have personal rewards. And so I think it's going to be important to continue to diversify your roster in that way as well. So it also takes a while, even through guild chapter farming, to farm up a full 7-star team, right? So I don't think this is going to be this instant free-to-play takeover for people who got 5-star Elrond. I will say, I think this is true, the gap between Krakens and whales or dolphins, basically the gap between people who spent like $2,000 on a 7-star Elrond and $200 on a 5-star Elrond, that gap is going to widen quite a bit, I think, actually. But I do think the gap between, somebody who spent $200 on Elronds, let's just call them dolphins or light whales, orcas maybe, and free-to-play is going to decrease a little bit. It's not going to close completely, but that is going to get smaller, whereas the gap between the Krakens and everybody else is going to get wider. And that probably doesn't affect you unless you're really in the top end of arena. So if you are, then yeah, of course it's going to affect you. But if you aren't, you probably don't have to worry about it as much. But let's get to how does this affect you. And first and foremost, my biggest piece of advice I can give you is you need to be pushing and completing all of the PvE content that they plan on changing. So all the Chapter 5, Chapter 6 stuff, and all the Tier 5 and Tier 6 challenges, you need to be pushing to complete those because we don't know how they're going to change. I'm going to assume that they're going to be increasing in difficulty rather than making them easier. You need to do them now so that you can auto them later. So just keep, just something you don't have to worry about, because if after the patch it's suddenly not even like reachable with anybody's current roster, then you're going to miss out on the long run on a lot of different resources. Second big thing I want to tell people is the advice that people were getting beforehand was to stop at 3 stars. You don't really need to farm past them. Focus on other things. Don't stop at 3 stars anymore. Keep hard shard farming for as long as you can. So your Rohan 3, if they're at 3 stars, keep farming them up to 5 stars at a minimum. Any Isengard 3, same thing. And that's going to tie into what I want to talk about next, which is that the characters on guild nodes, guild chapters, are going to be at a premium because they're so much faster to farm. And so Ugluk is going to be much better. He's always good in my book. He's the king of arena. Ironhide is going to be incredible, right? These are things you got to probably be thinking about taking up to 7 stars. Elra here, also going to be really, really good. So anytime they put something into the guild chapters, that's going to be worth farming up to 7 stars. The caveat to that is that you have to balance it against sort of what you're going to run. If you're trying to get Ironhide to 7 stars and you have something like Guild Chapter 5 unlocked, you need to weigh getting all the shards for Ironhide versus the resources you lose from farming Chapter 5 which includes gold and ability mats. So what I'm doing in this particular situation is, I'm doing this with Elra here, I'm going to do this with Ironhide and Ugluk as well, is I get them up, I farm enough shards for one of the characters, so Elra here to 6 stars, let's say. I just did this. Where is he? So I get enough shards from the farming Guild Chapter 3 for Elra here to get to 6 stars, and then I go back and I farm Chapter 5 for gold and ability mats. Then I have the gold and ability mats to upgrade him up to 6 stars, and I also want to kind of get some other things upgraded, get a little excess gold, and then I can go back and then I'm going to farm him up to 7 stars. I'm going to do the same thing for Ugluk, and I'm going to do the same thing for Ironhide. If you don't have Guild Chapter 5 unlocked, or even better, if you don't have Guild Chapter 4 unlocked, then yeah, I think it's probably worth it to just straight start farming these shards as far as you can. If you're further on, Guild Chapter 5 is unlocked at 53. So if you're at level 53 or above, you have to make that decision on what you think is best for you. It's just something that you need to consider. And then one of the things I want to talk about, one of these last things I want to talk about here is the Halbachad. Where does this leave characters like Halbarad and Bolg, who are in the challenge token stores? It takes, I think somebody in the Discord mentioned, like over a year for a free-to-play to be able to get Halbarad or Bolg up to 7 stars. That's insane. So the stars on these particular premium characters are super hard to come by. I'm like halfway to having 5 stars on Halbarad. So is Halbarad just going to be trash now? Is he bad? And the answer is, well, he's definitely not as good as he was before. So I think they probably need to buff the amount of shards you get from the store, or buff the amount of currency you get. I would hope that it's actually just the amount of shards you get per currency. So let's say you get 5 for 1,000 now, or something like that. So that way that process is a lot faster, because this is going to be a really long farm that might not be worth it, you know, when you unlock him like a year down the line, right? Oh, well, Halbarad is not really that useful anymore because some other character has come out recently. But again, tying back into the same point I said earlier, you are going to need different multiple teams just to complete PvE content, like all the challenges, but also for raids. And for that, if he is in a team with similarly starred and geared characters, I still think he's going to be really effective. He's still going to be very effective at healing and tanking and doing all the things he does when he's around characters that have similar stats to him. So is he need to go right into the waste bin? No, but he's definitely less valuable, and so you should consider how many resources you're going to put into him, because it's not just an automatic yes, dump everything into Halbarad anymore. It's you have to make a decision about it, basically. One last thing I want to talk about before I end the video is sort of maybe an unintended consequence of making this star change that I've been thinking about. And it's that there's going to actually be a much higher stake when discussing and doing data mines. Because now, especially when it comes to legendaries, I should say. Because now, if you can predict accurately the unlock requirements for a legendary, let's say, you know, Haradrim for Witch King, which has been data mined, right? Then you want to be farming them as early as possible so that you can get 7 stars. And so that just increases the stakes for data mines, because if the data mines turn out to be wrong, well, then you just spent a lot of time and energy on characters that aren't going to be used for the unlock requirement, and you've probably hosed yourself for just unlocking that legendary the first time around. And it's just sort of an unintended consequence, I think, of making the speculative part of the content creator ecosystem a lot more valuable moving forward by making these sorts of star changes. But I'm curious what you all think. I certainly have been reading things on Discord, but I don't think Discord represents like the mass majority of players who play this game. So if you have some other thoughts, please let me know down below. Happy to discuss. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thanks.